Today we're tackling one of life's toughest subjects, something that really touches all of us at some point. We're calling this explainer the Megaphone of Pain. So, when a disaster strikes, like that heartbreaking fire in Hong Kong, it leaves you in shock, right? And in the middle of all that grief, this heavy, unavoidable question just surfaces. Where is God in all of this? How could he possibly let something like this happen? And look, this question, it's not new. Not at all. In fact, it's this ancient question that just keeps echoing through human history anytime we come face to face with suffering. The writer C.S. Lewis, he had this really powerful way of looking at it. He said, pain is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. The idea is that God whispers to us when things are good, but he has to shout when we're in pain. And this idea, this megaphone, is going to be our guide today. Think about it, right? When everything's going smoothly, it's so easy to just cruise through life, We don't really think about the big stuff, the deeper meaning of it all. But tragedy just shatters that. It forces you to look at how fragile life really is. And all of a sudden, those ultimate questions about life and death and salvation, they become incredibly real. Okay, so one of the first places our minds often go is this a punishment? Is that what's happening here? Let's really dig into that assumption for a minute. Believe it or not, this question was just as pressing 2,000 years ago. In the Gospel of Luke, you have people coming up to Jesus to talk about two tragedies that had just happened. One was this brutal man-made horror show, Pilate murdering worshippers, and the other was a totally random accident. A tower just collapsed and killed 18 people. Basically their version of what we see today, human evil and what looks like a freak accident. So the thinking back then, and honestly sometimes today too, was pretty straightforward. Well, they must have done something really bad to deserve that. It's kind of how we try to make sense of the chaos. But Jesus, his response just completely shatters that idea. They ask him, were these people worse sinners than everyone else? And his answer is just this crystal clear, decisive no, they were not. And then, right after completely shutting that down, he does something, well, it's pretty jarring. He pivots. He looks right at the crowd, the people who are still alive, and says, but unless you repent, you too will all perish. And to repent, it just means to have a total change of heart, to turn away from your own way and turn toward God. This is such a critical turn in the whole conversation. See, Jesus doesn't get into some long, complicated philosophical debate about why bad things happen. Nope. Instead, he uses the tragedy as what C.S. Lewis would call it centuries later, the megaphone of pain. And this is the whole point. This is the core idea right here. The megaphone isn't shouting about whether the victims were guilty. It's shouting at the rest of us. Jesus completely flips the script. The question isn't, why did they die? The question that tragedy screams at us is, how are we living? It's a wake-up call to look at our own lives, right here, right now. So what does this all lead to? It becomes this really urgent, personal call to action. For you, for me, for every single one of us who's still here. Let's talk about how we see time. The famous reformer Martin Luther, he put it this way. My calendar has only 2 days. Today and that day. Meaning the day of judgment. And the book of James, it says your life is like a mist. You see it for a second and poof, it's gone. We all do this, right? We put off the big questions, thinking, I've got plenty of time. But here's the stark reality. Not a single one of us is guaranteed a tomorrow. The people who died in that fire, they didn't get their tomorrow. And their tragedy is a direct question to every one of us who still has a today. So what are we waiting for? Okay, but let's pause here for a second, because I need to be really, really clear about something. This is a tough message, right? It's not easy to hear, especially if you're in the middle of grief. The Bible never, ever tells us to just get over it or figure it out instantly. In fact, when Jesus' friend Lazarus died, he just wept. God doesn't rush us to the explanation. He meets us right there in our sorrow. So even if we never get all the answers on this side of eternity, the biblical narrative offers these 3, let's call them assurances. First, God isn't some distant observer. He actually entered into our pain through Christ on the cross. Second, he promises to be with us even when we're in the darkest valley. And third, he gives us today as a real chance to turn to him and find a hope that even death itself can't touch. And that brings us full circle, right back to where we started. In the face of tragedy, we ask, where is God? And maybe the answer is, he's in the sound of that megaphone. He's calling out, waking us up, and begging us to use the today that we've been given. So the final question isn't for me to answer, it's for each of us. If tragedy is a megaphone, what are we meant to hear?